The whispers followed Zara Chen down every hallway of Kepler Academy, like shadows she couldn't escape. Students pressed themselves against lockers as she passed, their eyes drawn to the intricate web of scars that covered the left side of her face and disappeared beneath her collar. The burns were old now, healed but permanent, telling a story most of her classmates would never understand. "There goes War Girl," Marcus sneered from behind her, his voice carrying just loud enough for others to hear. Wonder what battle she lost this time. Zara's shoulders tensed, but she kept walking. At 17, she had learned that responding only made things worse. The other students didn't know what those marks meant, couldn't comprehend the hell she had survived to earn them. To them, she was just the strange human girl with the damaged face, an easy target in a school where most students came from comfortable colony worlds that had never seen real conflict. The Kepler Academy was supposed to be neutral ground, a prestigious interspecies school where the children of diplomats, merchants, and military officers learned together. Humans, Valkyrie, Zenthi, and dozens of other species shared classrooms and dormitories, preparing for futures in an increasingly connected galaxy. But neutrality didn't extend to the social hierarchies that formed naturally among teenagers. In the cafeteria, Zara sat alone at a corner table, picking at her synthesized meal while around her. Groups of students laughed and gossiped in multiple languages. The Valkyrie students, with their proud warrior culture, dominated one section. Their blue-tinted skin and ceremonial braids marked them as elite, children of generals and clan leaders. They had noticed her scars, of course, but dismissed them as some human weakness, a failure rather than a badge of honor. "Hey, Burnface," called Kiris, a Valkyrie boy whose father commanded a battlecruiser. His friend snickered as he approached her table. "My father says humans are too soft for real war. Says you probably got those marks from falling into a cooking fire." The cafeteria grew quiet, dozens of eyes turning to watch the confrontation. Zara looked up slowly, meeting Kairos' amber eyes with her own steady gaze. For a moment, something flickered in her expression, something that made the Valkyrie boy take an unconscious step backward. "Your father's never fought humans," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that didn't match her years. "Lucky for him," Kiris laughed, but it sounded forced. "Humans are weak. Everyone knows it. You lost your war against the Devourers so badly you had to abandon entire star systems. What kind of warriors abandon their worlds?" The fork in Zara's hand bent slightly under the pressure of her grip. Around the cafeteria, students leaned forward, sensing the tension building like static before a storm. The Zenthi exchange students, with their insectoid features and compound eyes, chittered nervously among themselves. Even the usually boisterous human students had gone silent. "We didn't abandon anything," Zara said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We evacuated what we could save." "There's a difference." "Semantics," Kiris waved dismissively. "Retreat is retreat. The Devourers ate your colonies whole and you ran like frightened children. At least admit it." Something changed in Zara's posture. She set down her bent fork with deliberate care and stood up slowly. The scars on her face seemed to catch the light differently, the twisted flesh telling stories of heat and pain and choices no child should have to make. "The Centauri colony had 8 million people," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. Families, children, old people who couldn't run fast enough when the Devourers came. Kiris shifted uncomfortably, but his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of so many witnesses. "And you left them all to die. Typical human cowardice." Zara smiled then, and it was the coldest expression anyone in that room had ever seen on a teenager's face. "No," she said softly. "We didn't leave them to die. We made sure they didn't have to." The silence stretched taut as wire. Something in her tone made even the most confident students suddenly remember that humans, despite their reputation for weakness, had survived in a galaxy full of predators. They had earned their place among the stars not through superior technology or natural advantages, but through something else entirely. "You want to know about my scars?" Zara asked, her hand unconsciously touching the twisted skin at her temple. "You want to know what kind of war leaves marks like these?" Before Kairos could answer, the cafeteria's speakers crackled to life. "All students report to your dormitories immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all students to dormitories immediately." The spell broke as students began to move, chattering nervously about the unexpected announcement. But as they filed out, many cast backward glances at the human girl who still stood by her table. her scarred face thoughtful and distant. Zara remained motionless until the cafeteria was nearly empty, then slowly gathered her things. As she headed for the exit, she passed Kiris, who had lingered near the doorway with several of his friends. "This isn't over," he said, trying to salvage his reputation. Zara paused beside him, close enough that he could see the intricate pattern of her scars, the way they formed spirals and geometric shapes that seemed almost intentional. "No," she agreed quietly. "It isn't." As she walked away, Kiris felt a chill run down his spine. There had been something in her voice, something that spoke of experiences far beyond anything he could imagine. For the first time since arriving at Kepler Academy, the proud Valkyrie warrior's son wondered if he might have made a terrible mistake. Behind them all, the stars outside the Academy's viewports continued their ancient dance, unaware that in a few short hours everything would change. The emergency klaxons began wailing at 347 hours, their harsh cry cutting through the Academy's artificial night cycle like a blade. Students stumbled from their beds in confusion, some still in sleeping clothes, others frantically pulling on uniforms as dormitory wardens shouted instructions over the noise. Zara was already awake when the alarm started. She had learned long ago that sleep came easier when you kept one ear open for danger, while her roommate, a Zenthi girl named Thesix, clicked in distress and confusion. Zara was already reaching for the emergency kit she kept hidden beneath her bed. "What's happening?" Thesix chittered, her compound eyes reflecting the red emergency lighting that had replaced the normal illumination. "Is it a drill?" The warden said it wasn't a drill. Zara's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she pulled on her boots and secured her kit to her belt. "It's not a drill," she said quietly, listening to the pattern of the alarms. 3 long, 2 short, repeat. She had heard that signal before on another station in another life. "Something's coming." Through their dormitory window, the stars looked the same as always, distant and cold. But Zara's trained eye caught the subtle wrongness in the pattern, the way certain points of light seemed to flicker and shift. Ships, lots of them. Moving fast and trying to stay hidden, the dormitory door burst open as Warden Holcroft, a grizzled ex-military human, strode in. His usually calm demeanor was cracked with tension. "All students to the Central Assembly Hall. Move quickly, but don't run. We have an hour, maybe 2, before..." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in dim red. But in that moment of absolute darkness, Zara had heard something that made her blood run cold. A sound like static, but wrong, twisted, the kind of interference that came from ships using technology that shouldn't exist. "Devourers," she whispered. Warden Holcroft's head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" But Zara was already moving, pushing past confused students toward the window. The flickering lights in space were closer now, and she could make out their shapes, organic curves that hurt to look at directly, ships that seemed to bend light around them like living things. "How many escape pods does the Academy have?" she asked, her voice cutting through the growing panic. "Enough for half the student body," Holcroft answered automatically, then caught himself. "How did you—" "They're not here for prisoners," Zara interrupted, turning away from the window. "They're here to feed. The pods won't outrun them, and the Academy's shields won't hold for more than 20 minutes once they start their real attack." Other students had gathered around them now, drawn by the authority in Zara's voice. Kiris was there, his earlier bravado replaced by confusion and fear. Several Valkyrie upperclassmen flanked him, their warrior training warring with their inexperience. "You speak as if you know these creatures," said Valka Thesh, a senior whose mother commanded a Valkyrie dreadnought. "The Devourers are extinct. The Coalition fleets destroyed them years ago." Zara's laugh was bitter. The Coalition destroyed their main hive fleets, but they missed the scouts. The hunters, the ones that learned to hide and adapt and wait for the right moment to strike. The building shuddered as something massive passed overhead. Through the window they could see the Academy's defensive turrets beginning to track targets, their energy cannons charging with blue-white light. "Thesix," Zara called to her roommate. "Can your people's ships tunnel through hyperspace without a beacon?" The Zenthi girl's mandibles clicked nervously. "Yes, but only for short distances. Why?" "Because we're not getting out of this the normal way." Zara moved to her storage locker and began pulling out items that made the other students step back. Combat rations, medical supplies, and weapons. Lots of weapons. The Devourers hunt by following engine signatures and energy trails. Traditional escape routes are death traps. Where did you get all that? Kairos demanded, staring at the military-grade equipment emerging from what everyone had assumed was a normal student's belongings. Zara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she activated a small device that projected a holographic map of the academy and surrounding space. Red dots marked the approaching Devourer ships, while blue indicators showed the academy's defenses. "We have 15 minutes before they breach the outer shields," she said, studying the tactical display with professional precision. "The academy's automated systems will hold them for another 5 after that. Which gives us 20 minutes to get to Hangar Bay 7 and steal the fastest ship we can find." "Steal?" Valkathesh looked scandalized. "We cannot simply—" The first explosion cut her off. The academy shook like a toy in a giant's hand, and several students were thrown to the floor. Lights flickered throughout the dormitory as power systems struggled to compensate for the damage. 19 minutes, Zara corrected, shouldering a pack that shouldn't have been able to fit so much equipment. "The emergency protocols will start sealing sections soon. We need to move now." "Why should we follow you?" Kyrus demanded, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. "You're just a scarred human girl with a bunch of military surplus gear." Zara turned to face him, and in the red emergency lighting, her scars seemed to writhe and dance across her features. "Because I'm the only person on this station who's fought Devourers before and lived to tell about it. And because in 18 minutes everyone who doesn't listen to me is going to die." Another explosion closer this time. The tactical display showed red indicators breaching the academy's outer perimeter. The Devourers weren't just attacking, they were systematically dismantling the station's defenses with surgical precision. "They're not behaving like animals," Valka observed, studying the display. "This is coordinated, strategic." "The Devourers were never animals," Zara said grimly. "That was the Coalition's first mistake." "And their last." She headed for the door, then paused. "Anyone who wants to live needs to follow me. Anyone who wants to die honorably in battle can stay here and fight." Impossible odds with inadequate weapons. The dormitory fell silent except for the distant sounds of combat and the increasingly urgent alarm klaxons. One by one, students began to follow her. Even Kyrus, after a moment of internal struggle, fell in behind the group. As they moved through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting, Zara's mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating distances and angles and the terrible mathematics of survival. Behind them, the academy's defenses were failing exactly as she had predicted. 17 minutes to reach the hangar. 16 to steal a ship. 15 to escape before the Devourers turned their attention from the station's weapons to its fleeing prey. For the first time in months, Zara Chen smiled a genuine smile. She was back in her element, back in the business of keeping people alive against impossible odds. The scars on her face tingled with remembered heat, and she touched them once briefly like a soldier checking her weapons before battle. The academy's corridors had become a maze of chaos and terror. Emergency blast doors sealed randomly as the station's automated systems tried to contain hull breaches that weren't there yet. Students and faculty ran in all directions, some toward escape pods, others to emergency stations they'd only practiced reaching in drills. Zara led her group of 12 through service passages that most people didn't know existed. Her scarred hands traced familiar patterns on maintenance panels, opening doors that should have required administrative access. Behind her, the mix of species that had followed her from the dormitory struggled to keep up. "How do you know about these passages?" panted Raval, a Zenthi boy whose breathing apparatus was working overtime in the smoky air. "Maintenance workers see everything," Zara replied without turning around. "They also have access to places nobody else thinks about." She paused at an intersection, consulting a wrist device that definitely wasn't standard student equipment. "Left here. Stay low." The group followed her around the corner and immediately understood why. Through a massive viewing port, they could see the Devourer ships up close for the first time. The vessels defied easy description, their hulls seeming to shift and flow like living tissue. Weapons that looked more grown than built extended from their surfaces, already carving through the Academy's outer hull with surgical precision. "By the ancestors," whispered Valkathesh. "They're beautiful." "That's what makes them so dangerous," Zara said grimly. "People see that organic grace and think they're looking at evolved life. They're not. The Devourers are built, engineered, created by something that understood both biology and warfare better than we ever will. Kyrus had gone pale beneath his blue-tinted skin. Created by what? Nobody knows. The civilization that made them died out 1,000,000 years ago, but they left their children behind, sleeping in the deep dark between stars, waiting for the galaxy to get crowded enough to be worth hunting again. The station shuddered as another section of hull was breached. Through the viewport, they could see the Devourer's boarding craft beginning to detach from the main ships. These were smaller, more agile vessels that moved with the fluid grace of predators approaching wounded prey. 12 minutes, Zara announced, checking her device again. The boarding parties will reach the Academy's core in 8. We need to be gone before then. They moved deeper into the station's infrastructure, past massive power conduits and atmospheric processors that hummed with barely contained energy. The artificial gravity fluctuated as they walked, making some steps feel normal and others like walking through thick liquid. Zara, Thesix called from the back of the group. There are more students trapped in Section C. The blast doors sealed them in when the attack started. Zara stopped walking. For a moment her expression warred with itself. Duty fighting against pragmatism. How many? 30, maybe 40. Including some of the younger children from the primary levels. The silence stretched out between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the station's death. Everyone in the group understood the mathematics. 40 more people would require a larger ship, would slow their escape, would multiply their chances of being caught by the Devourer's pursuit craft. We can't save everyone, Kyrus said quietly. You said it yourself, we have minutes. Zara's hand went to her face, tracing the spiral patterns of her scars with unconscious habit. On Centauri Colony, we had the same choice. Save a few and run, or risk everything trying to save them all. What did you choose? Falca asked. Both. Zara's smile was sharp as broken glass. Thesix, can you access the station's communication system from here? The Zenthi girl's mandibles clicked as she considered. Through the maintenance network, yes. But what good will that do? I'm going to tell the Devourers exactly where we are. The group stared at her in shock. Several students took involuntary steps backward, suddenly wondering if the scarred human girl had finally snapped under pressure. That's insane, Kyrus breathed. No, that's tactics. Zara was already moving again, leading them toward a maintenance shaft that angled upward through the station's superstructure. The Devourers hunt by isolating and consuming small groups. They're not expecting anyone to announce their location and invite attack. Because that would be suicide, Rival pointed out. Only if you're planning to be there when they arrive. Zara hauled herself into the maintenance shaft with practiced ease. Thesix, once we reach the communication hub, I need you to broadcast on all frequencies. Tell them we're a group of 43 students trapped in Section C. Give them our exact location. But we won't be in Section C, Valka said, beginning to understand. No, we'll be in Hangar Bay 7, stealing their ship while they're busy tearing apart empty corridors looking for us. Zara's voice echoed strangely in the confined space of the shaft. The Devourers are perfect hunters, but they're still hunters. They follow the obvious trail. The shaft opened into a secondary command center that had been abandoned when the main bridge activated emergency protocols. Banks of monitors showed the battle raging outside the Academy, and the Devourer ships methodically working their way through the station's defenses. Thesix's fingers flew over the communication controls with inhuman speed. Broadcasting now, she announced. All Devourer ships, this is Kepler Academy Emergency Protocol 7. We have 43 students trapped in Section C, Level 12. Requesting immediate assistance. On the tactical displays, they could see the effect immediately. 3 of the smaller Devourer ships changed course, angling towards Section C with predatory eagerness. The larger vessels continued their systematic destruction of the Academy's weapons, but several boarding craft split off from the main assault. How long before they realize Section C is empty? Kyrus asked. Long enough. Zara was already heading for another maintenance access. Devourers are thorough. They'll search every room, every closet, every hiding place before they admit their prey escaped. That gives us maybe 20 minutes. They followed her through passages that seemed to exist in the spaces between the Academy's official architecture. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the air grew thicker with smoke and the ozone smell of burning electronics. There, Zara said, pointing through a service grate at the familiar outline of Hangar Bay 7. The good news is there are still ships in there. The bad news is they're all locked down under emergency protocol. Can you break the locks? Valka asked. Zara's grin was feral. Lady, I didn't learn to hotwire starships from maintenance manuals. She began working on the access panel beside the grate, her scarred fingers moving with the confidence of long practice. But we're not taking just any ship. We're taking that one. She pointed to a sleek vessel in the center of the hangar, its hull gleaming with the distinctive blue-black sheen of Valkyrie military design. It was larger than the other ships, built for speed and endurance rather than cargo capacity. That's Ambassador Thesh's personal cruiser, Valka gasped. We can't steal my mother's ship. Your mother's not here, Zara pointed out. And it's the only vessel in this hangar with enough range to reach a coalition fleet base without refueling. The access panel sparked and opened with a soft click. Besides, I bet she'd rather lose a ship than a daughter. The grate swung open, and one by one they dropped into the hangar bay. Around them, the abandoned ships sat like sleeping giants, their hulls cold and dark in the emergency lighting. Zara jogged toward the Valkyrie cruiser, pulling tools from her pack that definitely weren't standard Academy equipment. Kiris Rival watched the main entrance. Everyone else help me get this thing powered up. As they worked, the sounds of battle grew closer. Somewhere in the distance, metal screamed as devourer weapons carved through bulkheads like paper. The hunters were closing in on their false trail, but even devourers would eventually figure out they'd been deceived. Zara, Thesix called urgently. The boarding parties just reached Section C. When they find it empty, I know. Zara's hands flew over the cruiser's control systems, bypassing security protocols with techniques that would have impressed a professional ship thief. Almost there. Just need to convince this baby that we're authorized crew instead of terrified teenagers. The ship's engines began to hum with power. Running lights flickered to life along its hull, and the boarding ramp descended with a soft hydraulic hiss. Everyone aboard, Zara called. We launch in 60 seconds whether the docking clamps are released or not. As the group filed up the ramp, Kiris lingered beside Zara at the pilot's station. You're not a student, are you? He said quietly. Students don't know how to do this. Zara's hands paused over the controls for just a moment. I was a student once, on Centauri Colony, before the Devourers came. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw depths of experience that no teenager should possess. That was before I learned that sometimes children have to become soldiers, and soldiers have to become devils. And devils have to burn everything they love to save what little they can. The engines roared to full power, and the stolen ship lifted off into a battle that would test everything Zara had learned in the fires of her previous war. The stolen Valkyrie cruiser burst from Hangar Bay 7 like a comet, its engines screaming at maximum burn as Zara threw every ounce of power into their escape velocity. Behind them, the Academy convulsed in its death throes. Its hull split open like a broken egg as the Devourers methodically consumed everything they could find. Pursuit craft launching, Valka reported from the sensor station, her voice tight with professional calm despite the circumstances. 6 hunters closing fast. I see them, Zara replied, her hands dancing across controls she'd never trained on but somehow understood perfectly. The ship banked hard to starboard, gravity compensators struggling to keep up with her aggressive maneuvering. Everyone strap in. This is going to get rough. Through the main view screen, they could see the Devourer pursuit craft gaining on them. Unlike the massive capital ships, these hunters were built for speed and agility, their organic hulls rippling with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their prey's movements. They're reading our engine signatures, Thesix observed, studying the tactical display, tracking our quantum wake. That's what they're supposed to do, Zara said grimly. Kiris, I need you to man the weapons console. Rival, take engineering. Everyone else, find a station and learn it fast. Wait, Kiris protested. I don't know how to operate Valkyrie weapon systems. Then you'd better learn quickly, because in about 30 seconds those hunters are going to be in firing range. Zara's scarred face was illuminated by the console's glow, making her burn marks seem to writhe and shift. The targeting system is intuitive. Point-click prey. The first energy bolts from the pursuing Devourers split the space around them, coherent beams of destruction that turned nearby asteroids into glowing vapor. Zara rolled the ship between the attacks, using the cruiser's superior maneuverability to stay one step ahead of the hunter's aim. Return fire, she ordered. Kiris stabbed at the weapon's controls, and twin beams of blue-white energy lanced out from the cruiser's dorsal cannons. One shot went wide, but the other struck a pursuing hunter dead center. The Devourer ship's biohull rippled and absorbed most of the impact, then healed itself with visible speed. "They're regenerating," Kira said in disbelief. "Of course they are." Zara pulled the ship into a spiraling climb that would have turned a lesser pilot's stomach inside out. "You can't kill them with single shots. You have to overwhelm their healing capacity or hit their core organs." "Core organs?" Valka looked up from her sensor readings. "These are ships, not animals." The line gets blurry with Devourer technology. Another salvo of energy bolts forced Zara into a punishing series of evasive maneuvers. They're part machine, part creature, part something else entirely. The important thing is they have weak points. She called up a tactical overlay on the main screen, highlighting specific sections of the pursuing ships in red. "Here, here, and here. Those are the neural clusters that control movement and coordination. Hit them hard enough and the whole ship goes into shock." Kira studied the targeting information, then shook his head. "Those areas are tiny. I'd need to be practically on top of them to hit targets that small. Then get close." Zara's grin was savage. "Thesix, can you reroute power from life support to the engines?" "For how long?" the Zenthi girl asked, her mandibles clicking nervously. 90 seconds. Maybe 2 minutes if we're lucky. That will leave us with minimal oxygen and no backup systems. Dead from suffocation beats dead from being eaten by biomechanical horrors, Zara pointed out. "Do it." The ship suddenly leaped forward as additional power flooded the engines. The pursuing Devourers, caught off guard by the sudden acceleration, fell behind by several kilometers. But their own organic propulsion systems were already adapting, growing new thrust chambers and redirecting internal energy flows to match the cruiser's speed. "Bringing us about," Zara announced, and threw the ship into a turn so sharp that even the gravity compensators couldn't fully protect them from the G-forces. "Kiris, you've got one shot at this. Make it count." The cruiser came around in a perfect attack run, diving straight toward the lead Devourer hunter like a hawk stooping on prey. The distance closed rapidly, and Kiris could see individual details on the enemy ship's hull. Clusters of what looked like eyes tracked their approach, and weapons pods swiveled to meet their charge. "Now," Zara said quietly. Kiris fired everything the ship had. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and a spread of quantum torpedoes all converged on the Devourer's highlighted weak points. The enemy ship's biohull convulsed as the barrage overwhelmed its defenses, and for a moment it seemed to hang motionless in space. Then it began to change. The organic hull split open like a flower, revealing internal structures that were part machine, part nervous system, and part something that hurt to look at directly. Instead of dying, the Devourer was evolving, adapting to the attack pattern, growing new defenses in real time. "It's not dying," Kira said in horror. "It's learning. That's what they do." Zara pulled the ship away from the wounded hunter, but not before they all saw the truth. The damaged Devourer wasn't alone. It was communicating with the others, sharing information about their weapons and tactics. The entire pack was adapting based on a single ship's experience. "The others are changing too," Valka reported. "Their hull configurations are shifting. They're developing countermeasures to our weapons. Then we stop using weapons." Zara's expression was grim as she studied the tactical display. "Revel, how much antimatter does this ship carry for fuel?" The Zenthi boy checked his engineering console. "Enough for about 6 months of normal operation. Why?" "Because we're about to use most of it in the next 5 minutes." Zara began entering commands into the navigation system, plotting a course that made no tactical sense whatsoever. "Everyone hold on. We're going into the asteroid field." "That's suicide," Valka protested. "The density is too high for safe navigation." "Safe navigation isn't the point." Zara locked in their new heading and pushed the engines to maximum burn. "The point is making the Devourers follow us into a place where their advantages become disadvantages." The asteroid field loomed ahead of them, a dense maze of rock and ice that stretched for millions of kilometers. Navigation sensors screamed warnings as they plunged into the field, but Zara ignored them all. She flew by instinct and calculation, threading the cruiser between asteroids with clearances measured in meters. Behind them, the Devourer hunters followed, their organic hulls rippling with concentration as they tried to match the human girl's impossible piloting. But their very adaptability worked against them here. Their ships kept trying to evolve better solutions to the navigation problem, creating momentary instabilities as their hulls shifted and changed. "There," Zara said, pointing to a massive asteroid ahead of them. That one's got a metallic core, probably iron and nickel, perfect for what we need. What are we doing? Kyrus demanded, something that would horrify every safety inspector in the galaxy. Zara's fingers flew over the engineering controls, making modifications to the ship's antimatter containment system that definitely weren't in any manual. We're going to turn our fuel into a weapon. She flew the cruiser in a tight orbit around the asteroid, the Devourers following close behind. At precisely the right moment, she ejected the ship's entire antimatter supply in a carefully calculated spread, then hit the afterburners with every joule of power the backup batteries could provide. The antimatter contacted the asteroid's surface and annihilated, in a flash of pure energy that briefly outshone the system's star. The asteroid, suddenly transformed into an expanding sphere of superheated plasma, caught the pursuing Devourers in its embrace. Even their incredible adaptive abilities couldn't save them from the fundamental forces of physics. The hunters vanished in the plasma bloom, their biohulls overwhelmed by energies that could melt planets. In the sudden quiet that followed, Zara finally allowed herself to slump back in the pilot's seat. Around her, the other students stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. "How did you know that would work?" Valka asked quietly. Zara touched her scars again, and for the first time since anyone had known her, her expression was purely human, young, vulnerable. "Because I've done it before," she said softly. "On Centauri Colony, when I was 12 years old and the only thing standing between the Devourers and 8 million people was one little girl who refused to run away." Silence stretched between them as the implications sank in. Finally, Kyrus spoke. "The war stories they tell about Centauri," he said slowly. "The last stand. The miracle that saved the colony. That was you?" Zara nodded once, then turned back to the controls. "That was me. That was all of us. And now we need to warn the Coalition that the Devourers are back, because what we just faced was just a scouting party. The real fleet is still out there, waiting in the dark between stars. Outside the viewports, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small drama of survival that had just played out among them. But somewhere in that vast darkness, ancient minds were stirring, and the galaxy's deadliest predators were preparing to hunt once again. The Coalition fleet base at Kepler's Edge had seen better days. What had once been humanity's proudest deep space installation now bore the scars of hasty repairs and desperate improvisation. Gun emplacements clustered around the station like metallic barnacles, while patrol ships moved in nervous patterns through the surrounding space. Admiral Sarah Chen looked up from her tactical displays as the stolen Valkyrie cruiser docked at Bay 12. She had been expecting refugees from the academy, but not her own niece leading a group of shell-shocked alien teenagers into her command center. "Zara," she said softly, and for a moment the weight of command fell away from her shoulders. "When we lost contact with Kepler Academy, I thought—" "I know." Zara's embrace was brief but fierce. "We need to talk privately. The Devourers aren't extinct, and what hit the Academy was just the beginning." Admiral Chen studied her niece's face, reading the familiar signs of combat stress mixed with something deeper, something that reminded her uncomfortably of the reports she'd received from Centauri Colony 5 years ago. "How bad is it?" "Worse than last time. They've learned from our tactics, adapted. The weapons that worked before are useless now." Zara pulled up a holographic display showing the Devourer ships they'd encountered. "Look at these hull configurations. They're not following the old patterns anymore." The Admiral studied the recordings with professional interest, but her expression grew increasingly grim. "These are much more sophisticated than the ones we fought during the colony wars. How many ships did you encounter?" "At the Academy? Maybe a dozen. But Aunt Sarah," Zara's voice dropped to a whisper, "I think they were testing us. Learning our current capabilities. The real fleet is still out there." Admiral Chen turned to address the other students who had been standing quietly near the command center's entrance. "You've all been through a terrible ordeal. My staff will see that you're fed and given quarters while we contact your families." "With respect, Admiral," Valkathesh stepped forward, her posture rigid with Valkyrie military bearing. "We would prefer to remain here and assist in planning the defense." "Your children," the Admiral said gently. "You've done enough, children." Kyrus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Admiral, In the last 6 hours, we've stolen a starship, fought biomechanical horrors, and watched Zara turn antimatter into a weapon. We're not children anymore. Admiral Chen looked at her niece, seeing something in the girl's scarred face that she recognized from her own mirror. The expression of someone who had seen too much and learned too early that sometimes survival required terrible choices. "Tell me about Centauri," she said quietly. "The real story, not the sanitized version in the official reports." Zara was quiet for a long moment, her hand unconsciously tracing the spiral patterns of her scars. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of memory and loss. The Devourers came in the middle of the night cycle, 47 ships moving like a pack of hunters through our outer defenses. The orbital platforms bought us maybe 20 minutes before they were overrun. She paused, staring at something only she could see. My parents were on Platform 7 when it fell. The command center had gone completely silent. Even the background hum of electronics seemed muted as Zara continued her story. The evacuation was chaos. 8 million people trying to get off-world on ships designed for maybe half that number. The Devourers weren't just attacking randomly, they were hurting us, driving the population into specific areas where they could feed more efficiently. "The children's transport," Admiral Chen said softly, "the one that disappeared. You were on it. 200 kids ages 5 to 15. Our ship was damaged during the initial attack. Life support failing, engines dead. We were drifting toward the Devourer feeding zones when they found us. Zara's scars seemed to pulse in the command center's lighting. 3 hunter ships smaller than the ones we just faced, but fast, deadly." Thessex clicked nervously. "How did you survive?" "The same way we survived today, by being willing to do what the enemy didn't expect." Zara called up another holographic display, this one showing the schematics of a civilian transport ship. The cargo hold contained emergency supplies for the colony evacuation, including 40 tons of antimatter fuel intended for the long-range scouts. "You weaponized a civilian transport," Falca breathed. "I was 12 years old and watching my friends die one by one as the life support failed. The older kids were already talking about surrendering, thinking maybe the Devourers would show mercy to children." Zara's laugh was bitter. "Devourers don't show mercy. They don't even understand the concept. They just consume." She manipulated the hologram, showing how a child's small hands could access maintenance panels that adult fingers couldn't reach, how someone young enough to fit in the ventilation system could reroute power from non-essential systems, how a little girl with nothing left to lose could turn a disabled transport into a guided missile. "The hardest part wasn't the technical work," Zara continued. "It was convincing the other kids to get in the escape pods. They wanted to stay together. Didn't understand that staying meant dying. But you stayed," Kira said. "It wasn't a question. Someone had to pilot the ship, had to make sure it hit the target at exactly the right angle to take out all 3 hunters at once. The guidance system was damaged, so it had to be manual control right up until impact." Admiral Chen closed her eyes. "The escape pod. The one we found 3 days later with severe radiation burns and antimatter exposure. That was you. The ejection system barely worked. I got out maybe 10 seconds before the antimatter containment failed. Close enough to feel the heat, far enough away to live." Zara touched her scars again. "These aren't just burn marks. They're antimatter radiation patterns. The medical team said they formed spirals because of the magnetic fields during the explosion." The command center was silent for a long moment as everyone processed what they'd just heard. A 12-year-old girl had single-handedly destroyed 3 Devourer ships and saved 200 children by turning herself into a living weapon. "The official reports called it equipment malfunction," Admiral Chen said slowly. "Said the transport's antimatter containment failed accidentally and took out the pursuing ships. The other kids were traumatized enough. They didn't need to know that their survival came from one of their own becoming a killer." Zara's expression was distant. "Besides, the coalition needed heroes, not child soldiers. So they gave you the credit, made up a story about brilliant tactical planning and heroic sacrifice by adult crews. And you never corrected the record. What was the point? Dead is dead. Whether you die by accident or by a 12-year-old girl with a stolen transport and 40 tons of antimatter." Zara straightened, and suddenly she wasn't a traumatized child anymore, but a seasoned warrior discussing strategy. "But now the Devourers are back and they've learned from last time. The tactics that worked at Centauri won't work again." Admiral Chen studied the tactical displays showing the approaching threat. Long-range sensors had detected gravitational anomalies in the outer system, the telltale signatures of ships using Devourer biodrive technology. How long do we have? She asked. Maybe 6 hours before the advanced scouts arrive. 12 before the main fleet gets here. Zara called up new holographic displays showing fleet dispositions and defensive positions. How many ships can you muster? 47 vessels. Mixed classes, but all combat ready. The Admiral's expression was grim. Not nearly enough if they're bringing a full invasion fleet. Numbers won't matter anyway. The Devourers don't fight like a conventional enemy. They adapt, evolve, learn from every engagement. Every ship we destroy teaches them how to build better defenses. Valka studied the tactical information with professional interest. Then how do we fight them? Zara's smile was sharp and cold. By learning from them, by adapting faster than they can adapt to us, and by being willing to sacrifice everything to protect what matters most. She turned to face the group of students who had followed her through hell and somehow emerged stronger. I'm not asking any of you to stay. You've done enough, proven enough, but if you want to help save the galaxy, now's your chance. One by one, they stepped forward. Kyrus first, his earlier arrogance replaced by grim determination. Then Valka, her warrior's pride finally finding a cause worthy of her heritage. Thesix and Rival and all the others, children no longer but not yet adults. Something new. Something forged in the crucible of impossible choices and desperate survival. Admiral Chen looked at her niece and saw the future of warfare written in antimatter scars and determined young faces. What do you need? Everything, Zara said simply. And everyone willing to fight for it. Outside the viewports, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that the fate of every living thing in the galaxy now rested in the hands of children who had learned too early that sometimes monsters were real, and sometimes the only way to fight monsters was to become something even more dangerous. The battle for Kepler's Edge began not with the roar of engines or the flash of weapons, but with silence. The Devourer fleet materialized from the deep dark between stars like a nightmare given form, their biohulls drinking in starlight and reflecting nothing back. 43 vessels of impossible design, each one unique, each one perfectly adapted for the art of consumption. Admiral Chen stood in the command center's observation deck, watching her fleet take defensive positions around the station. 47 ships against 43 should have been acceptable odds, but she knew, as did everyone who had studied the colony wars, that with Devourers numbers meant nothing. They're not attacking, reported Commander Hayes from the tactical station. They're just waiting. Zara studied the enemy formation through the station's enhanced sensors. The Devourer ships hung in space like living sculptures, their hulls rippling with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse in complex rhythms. They're communicating, sharing everything they learned at the academy, planning. Planning what? Admiral Chen asked. How to take this station with minimal losses. They've seen our weapons, our tactics, our ship designs. They're figuring out the most efficient way to consume us all. Zara's scarred fingers danced across the tactical controls, highlighting specific enemy vessels. Look at their hull configurations. They've already adapted based on our previous encounters. Kyrus, now wearing the insignia of a temporary tactical officer, leaned over the display. Their bioarmor is thicker around the weapon clusters. They're expecting concentrated fire on those positions. And their propulsion systems have been reinforced, added Valka, her Valkyrie military training allowing her to read ship designs with expert precision. They're ready for ramming attacks or close-quarters combat. Thesix clicked nervously from her position at the communications console. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the lead Devourer ship. It's strange. Put it through, Admiral Chen ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing not the bridge of an enemy vessel, but something that defied easy description. Organic curves merged seamlessly with mechanical precision, creating a space that was part spacecraft, part living organism, part something else entirely. And at the center of it all, something that might once have been humanoid. The creature spoke in a voice like grinding metal and whispered promises. We remember you, little Admiral. Your species. Your defiance. You burned our children at the place you called Centauri. Admiral Chen kept her expression neutral despite the chill that ran down her spine. And we'll do it again if necessary. Will you? The thing that had once been human tilted its head with curiosity. We have learned much since that encounter. Your weapons, your strategies, your weaknesses. We have grown beyond your capacity to harm us. Then why haven't you attacked? Zara stepped into view of the transmission. her scars catching the light in patterns that seemed to mirror the Devourer's own bioluminescent markings. The creature's attention focused on her with predatory intensity. Ah, the little flame that burned so bright at Centauri. We remember you, child weapon. Your sacrifice taught us much about human desperation. What do you want? Zara asked bluntly. To offer you a choice. Surrender this station and its population voluntarily, and we will make your consumption swift. Resist, and we will take what we need slowly, learning from each death, growing stronger with each life we absorb. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in tense silence. Around them, the coalition fleet held position, waiting for orders that could determine the fate of millions. They're bluffing, Kira said finally. If they were as powerful as they claim, they would have attacked already. No, Zara said quietly. They're not bluffing. They're recruiting. Everyone turned to stare at her. Recruiting for what? Admiral Chen asked. Look at their lead ship's configuration. Look at the crew member we just saw. That was human once, or something very much like human. Zara called up detailed scans of the Devourer fleet, highlighting specific sections that showed artificial gravity wells and atmospheric processors. They're not just consuming populations anymore. They're converting them, adding their knowledge and abilities to their own collective. The implications hit the command staff like a physical blow. The Devourers weren't just predators anymore. They were a plague that grew stronger with every victory, absorbing the skills and knowledge of entire civilizations. How do we fight something like that? Valka asked. Zara studied the tactical display for a long moment, her mind working through possibilities and probabilities with the cold precision of someone who had learned to calculate survival in terms of acceptable losses. We don't fight them, she said finally. We teach them. Teach them what? Admiral Chen demanded. That some lessons are too dangerous to learn. Zara began entering commands into the tactical system, calling up files that had been classified so far above their clearance levels that most of them had never known such things existed. Aunt Sarah, I need you to authorize access to the Prometheus protocols. Admiral Chen went pale. Zara, those protocols were sealed for a reason. The technology is too dangerous, too unpredictable. More dangerous than extinction? Zara's expression was implacable. The Devourers want to learn from us, fine. Let's teach them something they'll never forget. The Prometheus protocols had been developed during the darkest days of the colony wars, when humanity faced the possibility of complete annihilation. They represented the ultimate expression of human military philosophy. If you can't win, make sure your enemy can't either. What are you planning? Kiris asked. Remember what I told you about Centauri? About being willing to sacrifice everything to save what matters most. Zara's fingers flew over the controls, initiating systems that had never been tested in actual combat. The Devourers adapt by learning from their encounters with us, so we're going to give them an encounter they'll never be able to process. The station's massive central reactor began to cycle up beyond normal parameters, its containment fields reconfiguring in patterns that made several engineers back away from their consoles in alarm. Warning lights flashed throughout the command. Sender's automated systems detected what they interpreted as a catastrophic malfunction. You're turning the entire station into a weapon, Admiral Chen said in horrified. Understanding, not just a weapon, a teaching tool. Zara's scars seemed to glow in the reactor's increasing output. When this station goes critical, it's going to take out half their fleet. But that's not the important part. The important part is how it does it. She called up a complex diagram showing the station's modified reactor configuration, instead of a simple matter-antimatter annihilation. The Prometheus protocols created a cascading quantum collapse that would propagate through subspace at faster than light speeds. Any Devourer ship caught in the initial blast will be destroyed instantly, Zara explained. But any ship that escapes will carry quantum resonance patterns back to their home fleet. And those patterns will be instructive. Thessix's mandibles clicked in alarm as she studied the technical specifications. This will make their biohulls unstable. Any ship that tries to adapt using the information from this battle will tear itself apart at the molecular level. Exactly. We're going to teach them that some knowledge is poisonous, that learning from humanity comes with a price they can't afford to pay. Admiral Chen looked around the command center at her crew, At the young people who had followed her niece through impossible odds and emerged stronger. The evacuation transports are standing by. We can get most of the station's population to safety before— No. Zara's voice cut through the preparations with absolute authority. If we evacuate, the Devourers will know something's wrong. They'll adapt, change their approach. The only way this works is if they think they're winning right up until the moment they learn otherwise. The silence that followed was broken only by the increasing hum of the overloading reactor. Everyone in the command center understood what Zara was asking. Not just their lives, but the lives of everyone on the station. 15,000 people sacrificed to deliver a lesson that might save the galaxy. There has to be another way, Kira said desperately. There is, Zara replied calmly. We can surrender. Let them convert us all into more Devourers. Let them add our knowledge to their collective and become unstoppable. She turned to face the group, her scarred face serene with terrible purpose. Or we can teach them that humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology or our tactics. It's our willingness to choose extinction over submission. One by one, the station's crew began to nod, not with enthusiasm, but with the grim understanding of soldiers who had run out of alternatives. Outside the viewports, the Devourer fleet began to move, their biohulls rippling with anticipation as they prepared to claim their prize. Admiral Chen took a deep breath and activated the station-wide communication system. All hands, this is the Admiral. What we do today will echo through history. Not because we lived, but because we chose how to die. Stand to your posts. For humanity, for the galaxy, for everyone who comes after us. The Devourer ships accelerated toward the station, their weapons charging with deadly light. In the command center, Zara placed her hand on the final activation switch for the Prometheus protocols. Any last words? She asked with dark humor. Kiris managed a weak smile. Yeah. Next time you tell us you're just a scarred human girl, we're not going to believe you. Zara laughed, and for just a moment she sounded like the teenager she should have been. Then her expression grew serious, and she looked around at the faces of the people who had chosen to follow her into legend. The Devourers think they understand humanity because they've consumed our bodies and absorbed our knowledge. But they've never understood our souls. Today we teach them the difference. Her hand came down on the switch and Kepler's edge became a star. For exactly 17 seconds, the station's reactor output exceeded the luminosity of the system's primary, painting the surrounding space in light that would be visible from neighboring systems. When the light faded, there was nothing left but expanding gas and quantum resonance patterns that would poison the Devourer collective for generations to come. And in the deep dark between stars, ancient minds recoiled from knowledge too dangerous to possess, learning for the first time in 1,000,000 years that some prey was too costly to hunt. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the Devourers had returned, they had been taught to fear. And fear, as humanity had always known, was the beginning of wisdom.